Ladies and gents, we are fortunate enough to have not one, but two attorneys here who are going to keep us on the straight and narrow. We have Angela Dougherty from Ward & Smith and Erica Rogers. Angela's field of expertise is intellectual property and trademark. So yes, when you go and take those pictures off the internet and they say license needed, that's what she's talking about. She could be representing those pictures against you. And so what we're going to talk about for the next little bit is understanding and respecting copyright, intellectual property, and trademark laws. So please welcome Angela Dougherty and Erica Rogers from Ward & Smith.
So I came in a little late, but I heard you guys talking about all the trees that you want to nurture and hug, and as you build your business. Well, one of the worst ways that you can hurt your business is beginning to inadvertently set those trees on fire. So when you hear from an attorney, or if you need me, I get right out of the gate that you don't want to talk to me, you don't want to have to deal with me, and something has gone terribly wrong. And so that's really what I'm here to talk to you today about, and I'll answer questions on how do you protect your own intellectual property, which is a completely different area, but how do you protect yourselves from even needing Erica or I on any basis. And the first is what you guys have been talking about from a social media perspective. Well, so what social media are you using? Are you using, I think I heard somebody talking about Google+, are you using Facebook, are you using Yelp? What are the terms of use for those companies? So every time you go on one of those companies and you're attempting to build your business and your brand, you may be inadvertently giving them certain rights that you're working so hard to build. A lot of those companies, if you read their terms of use when you sign on, you give them licenses to use your trademarks, which is your brand name. You may give them a license to repeat whatever you put out there. Or reuse your image. And so those are all things that if you're building value in those items, you don't want to give other people the right to do that. The other thing is, on the flip side, don't use anybody else's material. And be very careful when you are creating your own website. Be careful what you are giving other people the right to reuse, and be careful of going and lifting items off the internet where you're not really sure where they came from. There is a copyright myth that is prevalent, especially with small businesses, that if I give credit, or I tell somebody where I got it, or I cite the website and they can link right back to it, that's not a problem. And actually that's not true. And a good portion of both what Erica and I dealt with today, this morning, was the fact that somebody was using software that they didn't have a license to. So this is images, this is sounds, this can be text, right down to the systems that you use to operate your business. Monitor the use of your intellectual property. So you spend a lot of money having that logo created, you spend a lot of money trying to figure out what your name was going to be. You can damage your own business by allowing others to use your name without permission, or using a name similar to yours, that it causes consumer confusion that there's some type of an affiliation. And especially with small businesses, sometimes you feel like, well, that's okay. I know Joe. Joe's not going to hurt my brand. And then I know Sue, and Sue's not going to hurt my brand. Well, pretty soon, in 2 or 3 years, when you haven't stopped Joe and Sue and your other friends from using your brand, and then somebody that you don't like starts using it, the law, because you have not started to protect yourself, is not going to help you at that point. So that's one of the biggest pitfalls we see of small businesses for intellectual property. It can be very expensive to make sure you're not using somebody else's name, and it can be very expensive to enforce your own intellectual property. So from an economic standpoint, many times people push this down on the list, and by the time they have the funds to actually go after or enforce what they have, unfortunately they've already lost it. Creating your own work, and that's a tricky thing, right? Because we all feel like if we paid somebody to create something, it's ours. Intuitively, if I pay Erica to draw me a picture, it's mine, right? I mean, I told her what I wanted. I might have even told her what was supposed to be in it. That's not true under copyright law. You may own the physical painting. You may have certain rights to use whatever it is they created for whatever purpose you ask them to create it, but ultimately they own it. and at some point they can stop you from using it. They can allow some other third party to use it, and that's very frustrating, especially when you're talking about not just a picture that you put across your website, but if you're talking about a designer that did your entire website, and to have that taken away, including the domain name, can be very detrimental to a company that's been in business a year or two, so you're really just hitting your stride, you're really hitting where you're supposed to be making a profit. You want to change companies, you want to change marketing vendors, and you find out that you can't because you don't own the intellectual property rights in that. Putting symbols on your own work, the copyright symbol, the C in the circle, there's no requirement that you actually register to put the C in the circle. Under federal law, as soon as a work is created, whether it's music, whether it's a play, whoever created it owns it. And those copyrights come into existence and they are what they are. You can federally register your copyrights with the federal government. That gives you additional what I call, or I refer to as, legal teeth. So that's really when you want to enforce it. It doesn't broaden your rights, it doesn't make your rights any stronger, but it gives you the ability to seek protection and to seek redress or damages if the value of whatever it is that's being infringed is that detrimental to your business. And then same with trademarks, but trademarks for rights purposes, you can use a TM symbol on any name or logo that you perceive that represents your business. But the rights in a trademark aren't the same as a copyright. So trademark rights are based on use. You have to actually start using the mark, and then it's geographically restricted until you do the registration process. And you can do that on a state level or a federal level. That's another misstep that I would say a lot of small businesses make, more from an economic standpoint than anything else. It can be a long process, it can be an expensive process, and when you're talking about business planning, today you may only be here, you may only be in eastern North Carolina, you may only be Raleigh to east of I-95, but in a year, 2 years, 3 years, you want to be in Asheville, you want to be in South Carolina. If you haven't taken the registration steps, you could find yourself limited. You could find yourself having to change your name. And that's another area that Eric and I spend a lot of time in, as far as counseling people on if they've selected a name that's available, somebody else isn't already using it, somebody else hasn't already registered it, and then helping people navigate the very painful process of having to change their name. And when you're talking about going from a small business that's been somebody's baby to having to change the name after 2 years, 3 years. 2 years ago, I helped somebody change a name that they had been operating for 20 years. But they decided they wanted to franchise, and so for certain parts of the country, they could certainly continue to use their name, but they found that on a federal basis, they could not continue to expand. And so you talk about a very expensive rebrand to eventually achieve their long-term goals that were 20 years in the making. So trademark, think about it as your face to any consumer. When they think of that name, when they think of that logo, they think of you. It's also another way that you make your business perpetual. When somebody buys your business, they're buying your brand, they're buying your goodwill. And that's one way to make sure that the legacy of the business that you worked so hard to build lives on. And then lastly, be safe. Be safe with whatever information you are collecting about your consumers and whatever information you're putting out there. Every day, data, security, privacy, you see if companies as large as Target can be hit, New York law firms can be hit and held liable. And we're not just talking about credit card information. You can be held liable for having email addresses, mailing addresses with people's first and last names disclosed. There's legal liability for that. And in some cases, it's criminal. And so just be, you know, that is very scary, and I get that that's very scary, but it is an area that many businesses don't understand because right off the gate, they're taking Square, they're putting it on their iPhone, and they're making money. And they're not considering when they're taking those orders and they're putting that information in a spreadsheet, in a Word document that's on their home computer, and they may or may not have security on their internet access. If there's a breach for any reason, you're liable. And the North Carolina Department of Justice will contact you. And there are certain things that you have to do within certain days and parameters of the disclosure. So that would be the last part that is somewhat intellectual property related when it comes to data, because we deal with a lot of software issues.